All right. Well, let's just start with this. What do these three things have in common? Taylor Swift with her cat, Bud Light, and Penzies Spices. Um, and you may not be familiar with all of these, but maybe a couple of them, and perhaps what comes to your mind, given the topic of this session, is political polarization. And each of these is connected in some ways to recent events in the United States that manifests our own political polarization. Most recently, we have Taylor Swift endorsing Kamala Harris, pretty big deal. My daughter tells me that this will not affect her popularity one bit, and she's possibly her biggest fan. The Bud Light one was a little while ago, a couple of years ago, where they had there was a lot of controversy about an endorsement that Bud Light got, and the right wingers came down pretty hard against that product. And then the last one is also kind of recent, but a little more obscure. Anybody in here heard about the Penzies spice thing? No. I'm going to come back to it, but basically Kamala Harris made a stop at one of their stores. I don't remember which city it was, Pittsburgh, I think. And it turned into a big deal because the owner of Penzies Spices is very vocal about his politics. I'll come back to that one, though, because it's very personal. What I want to talk about today is a little bit of kind of setting the stage for the other panelists by saying what we mean by effective polarization, but also exploring this question of why you should care about it. And a question I didn't know that I would need to answer until really this summer at a conference I was at here in Budapest. And so I'll say a little about that. I'm going to say a few ways of solving it, which is of keen interest to me these days with my own research. And so I'll sneak a little product endorsement of my own there, and tell you ultimately what I hope that third way of dealing with polarization. I think it's the best. And I think we'll hear, of course, from other panelists, some different, maybe similar visions about how to respond to polarization. Of course, earlier, if this were 20 or 30 years ago, we would probably be talking about ideological polarization. That's not what we mean these days. Ideological polarization refers to people, politicians taking increasingly distinct issue positions. And I love this chart from Pew Research that it's been used a lot. I mean, probably every one of these have used this in their classes when they talk about polarization, mostly to say what it's not. And these graphs show you distributions of Republican and Democrat voters in the United States based on where they place themselves on a set of issues. And so they take an average of their positions. And the blue is Democrat and the red is Republican. And the graphs are supposed to be showing you, how people have in these parties have grown more distinct ideologically over the years. And you could say, well, if that's what we mean by polarization, isn't that important? Is it a thing? And what we've kind of found is that it's probably not that much of a thing if we're really just focusing on distinct ideological positioning. The main reason is that the graph reflects people's self-sorting into these parties, but that if we look at the underlying distributions of where people in the United States are today, and I can't speak for European opinion polling and what it would show there, I suspect it's going to be something similar, which is that Americans generally, if we don't group them by party, but we just look at their distributions on any given issue, they tend to be unimodal, not bimodal. And most people are kind of in the middle on most issues. And so to talk about ideological polarization, not so interesting. I got to show you this one graph here. So this is an instance of this. Gallup has been asking the same question for almost 50 years now about an issue that is still alive, right, in U.S. politics. Do you think abortions should be legal under any circumstances, only under certain circumstances, or illegal in all circumstances? And the bottom two lines reflect the extremes: legal under any circumstance, or the dotted line, illegal in all circumstances. There's a bit of bumping around there, right? But what impresses me about the graph is, first of all, there's remarkable stability, but more importantly, the absolute top position there, it's the middle one. Yeah, so over 50% of people usually saying, well, legal, but under certain circumstances. And we see that across a lot of issues. Even when there's a shift in average preferences, the average preference is still kind of the middle one. And so Ideological polarization, not so much, but affective polarization, yes, we do see this. And this is now is what we're really worried about. And I think is generally the topic of this panel today. This showing you more Pew data where they ask a different set of questions about how people in one party feel about the other party. And these are showing you the numbers of people who say, you know, well, I feel very unfavorable or unfavorable towards the opposite party. And those numbers are kind of going up. This survey only covers about 20 years. It gets worse if we look more recently as the numbers have continued to go up. And here's one comparing the United States to several other democracies. Again, the kind of graph a lot of these folks are using in their classes to teach their students from a study by some Stanford scholars. And the US is the upper left graph, and it's showing you the average polarization of the people taking these, in this case, election surveys. And that polarization's been going up pretty steadily in the United States. And this shows you, very hard to see, it's a little tiny, up through 2020, and it's just kept going up. So this is a problem. Other countries are kind of not far behind. Switzerland, where one of our colleagues on the panel is from, has also experienced a fair amount of this kind of polarization. France is also up there. But we see other countries where it's not so much, or even where it seems to be going down. So there is some variation in this experience. So there's enough of it, especially in the United States, but now in other countries too, that, you know, that we talk about this and we worry about it, or at least I think we should. Why should you care? Now, in the United States, this graph showing you a different survey of US voters. This is by the New York Times in 538, where they just asked Democrats and Republican voters, what do you think is the most important issue today? And or how important are you, how concerned are you with these issues? And the red dot is Republicans and the blue dot is Democrats. And you see they kind of flip on some issues, right? Different people in different parties see different issues as salient. So the top one, inflation or increasing costs, is more important for Republicans, although a lot of Democrats are worried about it. Second one, crime or gun violence, mostly going to be a Democrat issue. But the third one, political extremism or polarization, stands out actually in this case for people from both parties. So there's kind of a bipartisan consensus that there's a problem here. So voters in the US care about this, but you know, how much really should you? What struck me about my experience at a conference right here at the Democracy Institute this summer was that a number of European scholars in the room with us, our good friends, and Levi was there with me and Murat, and we were really struck by there were a number of people in the room who said, well, why is polarization a problem if it reflects how much I hate the radical right? And because don't they deserve to be hated? This is like hating Nazism. It's hating fascism. And so this is good. This is good. They feel very good about that kind of those strong feelings and that hatred. And I was a little astonished because I thought, wow, in the US, this is sort of a settled question that this hatred is not good. But here, you know, there's some kind of debate about it. So I thought, well, I probably better spend a little time saying, well, I think you should care about this. And I don't think it's good to hate, even if you're hating someone on the radical right. So a few things that we have to think about in the U.S. One is how it makes life miserable. It really does. And you're experiencing this now in a number of European countries too, where it's just everyday situations, relations with friends and family become poisoned by this sort of toxic politics that you experience. And I said I'd bring this back in, the Penzi spice thing. So this is personal for me because our family used to shop for spices at Penzi's. They really offer a very good product. These are great spices if you do a lot of home cooking at your house and you're a real foodie, you order their spices. And so they have stores all over the country that are kind of upscale, yuppie sorts of places. But their catalog, we would get their catalog, and there was a little letter from the owner, Bill Penzi, that would be like, oh, hope you enjoy our spices. Cooking is wonderful. But then a few years ago, he started including political messages in this, saying, you know, here are the causes I endorse, and I hope you do too, if you're a caring, good person. And we were like, well, we don't always agree with you on some of these things. And then he's posted stuff recently about, you know, why Republicans are wrong. I mean, that's the title of his post. And so it got to where we couldn't stand to buy his spices anymore. It was so obnoxious. Fortunately, his sister owns a spice company in Chicago, the Spice House. And so now we just shop there. So I don't know if this has really been good for his business or not, but right, we're trying to avoid this situation where we're just feeling the toxicity all the time. So it makes life miserable. And I don't want to live like that. It's also, as we can tell you in the U.S., can be much harder to get policy done, especially if the two parties are equally matched and are always at loggerheads. This mattered a lot here in Europe because remember that funding that didn't get to Ukraine to help in their war and allowed the Russians to make progress? That was because Congress couldn't get together on this and because of the polarization that stopped them from getting very important things done. This matters an awful lot then. And ultimately, of course, turning into violence. And we think of the January 6th insurrection, but I'd also think more recently going the other way about crazy people trying to kill Donald Trump on the campaign trail. This is really ugly stuff. And so I hope, I think there are other arguments out there about why you should care about this. There are different ways of solving this. And we see a lot of interesting, good research now. I hope we'll hear about some of this from other panelists. Now, the way that I hope you will not do, right, is like my friends this summer saying, well, the way of solving this is by making it worse, by being even more polarizing, cordon sanitaire, shut down the other side and rejoice in it when they're shut down. And I just don't think that's the right way. I mean, I've given you a lot of reasons why I don't think this helps to, pour more gas on that fire. And also because there are other ways of dealing with this I think are more productive. Now, the second one I think is not actually going to be the best. This is used a lot in the United States right now, which are prejudice reduction exercises. They do what they call a lot of interpersonal contact. This comes to us from this great social scientist. Sorry, I just blanked on his name. Help me, Levi. It's not going to come to any of you, is it? It's blanked all of our minds right now. I keep thinking of his co-author, Pettigrew, but okay. So his work on this shortly after World War II was geared towards understanding and dealing with racial prejudice in the United States. And I think this is actually usually a pretty good technique if you can set up these exercises where people from one group come in contact with the other in productive ways. And the reason it works so well is because they are usually reflecting conflicts based on prejudice, on bias that's really deep, misunderstandings of the other side. And you need an exercise like this to overcome that kind of bias. With political polarization, effective polarization, this actually becomes a lot trickier because a lot of times it's not based on misunderstandings about the other side, but actual grievances, distinct positions. I have a position here. I know you have a position there, and I really disagree with you on this. What this calls for is a different set of techniques that are usually associated with conflict resolution. And for many political scientists, this is an unfamiliar territory unless you do international relations, where they teach people all the time skills to be a better diplomat. You learn conflict resolution techniques in international relations, but not in the other subfields that we deal with. It's not popular, especially among the Americans, to do this. But there are a lot of fields that use these same set of skills. They always call them different names. Everybody has their own book they publish. But it's the same stuff. And so if you're at a business school, they're going to teach you different techniques for business negotiations, same skill set. I've got one here from BYU's Law School, Center for Peace and Conflict Resolution, very fancy name for a place that has the law students learn how to do mediation between students and landlords. And it's the same set of skills. If we go to clinical psychology, marriage therapy, for example, same set of skills. They typically involve things like setting a good tone, learning active, engaged listening, respectful speaking, identifying common ground. Techniques that are used in a setting where, again, the two sides may actually have accurate understandings of each other, but they have strong positions and they've been treating each other very disrespectfully. And if we can get over that and show each other a little respect, calm things down, follow some rules, and have better listening, we can eventually find common ground. Where this has been used in a number of settings very successfully. I have to here give a good shout out to John Curtis, currently representing my district in the U.S. House of Representatives, running for Senate right now for Utah. He will win because he got the Republican primary, which means it's done. But it turns out he's really good at these skills. He holds 40 town hall meetings every year, which is unheard of for any member of Congress. Most members of Congress avoid town hall meetings like the plague. He's really good, though, at listening. He knows these skills and uses them superbly. He's very comfortable in that setting as a result. And because of that, even though he's a moderate Republican, he still gets a lot of support. So it's a tremendous skill set. It's worked very well for him. I think it's going to be a key to his probably winning the Senate seat. But we also have wonderful examples here. And I hope I'm not stealing Murat, your thunder here to mention again, right? Oh, the Book of Radical Love here in Turkey. The experience of the CHP, the People's Republican Party, was so remarkable and dramatic. They shifted from a confrontational stance. Remember, that was strategy number one. To strategy number three, they taught all of their campaign workers these kinds of techniques. And it worked really well. It turns out that it was a way of winning over voters from the other side. It was highly successful electorally. It's also, and I love these pages from the book anyway, we could spend a lot of time reading the booklet together. We have organizations in the United States now, nonprofits, that are also trying to teach this. Braver Angels is one that I work with. And then we're trying this out as an experiment in our classroom. This is a shout out to my research. We finally finished all the work and gathering the data, and now we can start analyzing the data. So I don't have any results to share with you, sorry. But we're hopeful. We'll see if this thing that we tried out as a module that we teach students, university students, works at helping them become depolarizers among their family and friends. Okay, so bottom line here is I hope that the success of some of these efforts at using this third strategy will persuade you a little bit, and maybe even just hearing, oh, there's a different way of approaching this. Yes, there is. And I hope ultimately then you'll learn to be conflict resolvers. Here I sneak in one page from the Radical Love booklet. I love this. Talk less, listen more. Two men conversing. I really like this man. What did he say? Nothing. Learn to listen more, and you may be astonished, even perhaps listening to people on the radical right. With that, I'll end my words.